Cool. Hi, everyone. I am Indigo, and I've got just over 6 years in the industry, and I've kind of worked in a variety of different specializations within design. That's all just informed my narrative work. I think it really helps to have a broad understanding of all the different parts of design, so that you can really create something that works together. Um, and I think, yeah, that's helped me just create more cohesive and well-rounded designs as I've worked with a narrative. So I started off as a content and feature designer on Microsoft project Gears Pop, which was a game set in the Gears of War universe. I then moved on to casual Yahtzee with Buddies, where I was working as a systems and feature designer. And then finally, before my most recent job, physics-based battle royale, also as a features and systems designer. Since then, I spent the last couple of years working as the sole narrative designer and writer at a company called Oxalis. This is a live sim, live service role-playing game. So I designed, planned, oversaw pretty much anything related to the narrative, all the features that we needed to tell our story, which also included writing and implementing all the text from UI to dialogue to item descriptions, all the fun stuff. I am speaking in the past tense because as of very recently, I got I got laid off. So I've been freelancing at the moment. This is probably something people in the room might be going through at the moment. I've spoken to a lot of people in a similar situation to myself. So this talk has become the world's most intense job interview. Um, but here I am, freelancing, having a great time, looking for new adventures, and I'm really proud of what the team made. We have made something really special, and I've been kind of just really excited to get to talk a little bit about what I've been doing over the last couple of years. So, when I joined Moonfrost, all I had was a genre and a game title. My job was then to figure out what's the story, how are we telling it, and how are we creating something potentially never-ending to bring players back for years to come. So with a very small amount of information and a terrifyingly blank page, I spent the last couple of years just forming a process to methodically but creatively create a story or a game narrative from scratch. In my experience, a little step can really take you a long way. And so I just really want to share some of that knowledge for anyone who is eventually or already is walking in the same shoes, in the hopes of making a daunting task a little bit more bite-sized and manageable. So I formed a step-by-step framework without really meaning to, but then I put it on paper and realized I'd actually done something with my life over the last couple of years. That was nice. It started with very little, and hopefully will end with something cohesive, a narrative and a story world that will really support your gameplay and your monetization. This was very much created organically through my personal experiences and challenges, so please take it with a pinch of salt. Most of the time, I'm just making stuff up and following through confidently enough that no one really asked me any questions. Notable steps include things like just designing rationale-based systems, forming some restrictions and theories, some coping mechanisms for when you just want to cry. That's a joke, but if you need a hug, let me know. I'll send my mum your way. This is not going to give you your idea for the actual narrative. That is all on you and your lovely brain. But it's just a way to kind of info gather and hopefully just make some early decisions that will really benefit your game. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure book. It's just all about asking yourself the right questions at the right time, which can hopefully give you quite a lot of info. I think Portal is a great example of this. You can see the narrative and the core mechanic are obviously working in unison and hand in hand to really create something powerful. The narrative is a really clear response to early gameplay decisions that they'd made rather than just being shoved on top. So I think that really goes to show how powerful a thought through narrative can be. So, first step is all about identifying some restrictions based on what you know about the game or what you'll hopefully soon know about the game, and setting yourself some goals of what you want your narrative to achieve. And this can pretty much just be broken down into two questions, which is what are you working with and what are you working towards? So, firstly, I just identifying some restrictions about the game. So I found that the key ones that I came across were the genre, the game title, the core mechanics, the business model, the target audience, the age rating, and the setting. For example, if you're live service and you don't have any plans to be a replayable game, you probably don't want to have like really in-depth branching narrative choices. So just this will help you kind of figure out certain things that you want to avoid. This is going to help you understand the limits that your narrative has. So anything your story can't be and shouldn't do, which will make the next step that much easier. So once I had a list of what I knew about the game, suddenly that blank page just wasn't so blank anymore. And I could kind of start seeing something forming. This list is not exhaustive. Things like project scope or any other important aspects that you come across, these were just the ones that I felt really helped me figure out what I was doing. So for Moonfrost, that looked a little something like this. We knew that the title was Moonfrost. We knew farming and crafting were core mechanics. We knew we were modern day fantasy. Things like aiming for a target audience of Stardew and Animal Crossing players, and just kind of putting this down on paper and anything else that you can think of. So now we know what we can't do. What can we do? What should we be trying to do? So what is your game trying to be? What's the tone? What's the maturity level, the themes, the gameplay, the things that you're trying to justify in your gameplay? So using those restrictions, you can start putting together some goals. And that looked a little bit kind of like this. So we knew that one of the goals we had was we wanted to focus on interpersonal relationships and conflicts, because we know that our target audience that's something that they respond really well to. Using our setting as an example, modern day fantasy, you don't have to figure out the entirety of the setting. It's more just figuring out like where on the spectrum you land. So if you're fantasy, how far are you leaning into that fantasy? Are you fireballs and dragons, or are you toned down and familiar, but just with some odd things happening as you go? I like to take what's called a Goldilocks approach, which is basically 3 options, one on one extreme, one on the other end, and then something in the middle, which is probably roughly what you're aiming for. Next up, we have our razor. So the narrative razor is really just going to help people not in your lovely heads figure out what it is you're talking about. So a razor, for those of you that don't know, is a method of extracting key elements from a small handful of inspirations that are going to help you paint a picture to other people of what you're aiming for. You often see this used in pitch documentation, and if you're looking for a bit more advice on just how to represent your ideas on paper, I really recommend a book by Aaron Topalian called Building a Game Pitch. A lot of games that you know and love can be reverse razored to identify some of their key influences. So for example, first-person shooter Valorant could be pretty much summed up as Overwatch hero-based gameplay with CSGO's playstyle. This can just be a really helpful way of just delivering some information very quickly. Now, one of the industry's best kept secrets is our job is really, really fun. So read, watch, play, all the things, and figure out some of your key inspirations. So that's going to be 2 to 4 pop culture references, and then 3 key aspects from each of those references that you're combining to make something new but somewhat familiar. And this doesn't just have to be games. This could be books, TV shows, brands, sports, just anything that resonates with what it is that you're trying to make and the tone and the theme of your world. So ours looked a little something like this, combining 3 different pieces of pop culture and some of the key aspects that I liked from each of these. Obviously, after many tweaks and changes. You may find that you also have an overall game razor. Try not to overlap your references with your overall game razor. It's really important that this is just focusing on the narrative. So next up, we have narrative pillars, and these are basically core rules to stand by. So these are kind of just some philosophies and beliefs pertaining to your narrative that you really just want to figure out as early as you can. You might even find similar to me, that I ended up with a set for my narrative, but also a set for my characters, which I designed with kind of different mindsets. You want them to be restrictive enough that you can easily identify what is right or wrong for your project. There is no good or bad, but not so strict that nothing can possibly work. So for Moonfrost, we ended up a little like this. As a live service game, we knew that we required flexibility to grow and release new content. But as an RPG, we needed the world and the lore to be cohesive and to allow us to go wherever we needed it to go, like including cross promos and stuff like that. Like if we wanted Spider-Man to exist here, how could Spider-Man exist here? I then linked each pillar with a different area of the game and different goals that we already knew we were trying to achieve. So for example, Go Anywhere is all about our premise and our setting. As a live service game, we needed the freedom to extend our narrative as needed without breaking our lore and our story world. So we knew that the premise needed to be able to take the story in whatever direction we needed it to go. Be Anyone is who our player character is. Our restrictions highlighted crafting as one of our core mechanics, meaning customization is going to be huge for us. And that's both the environment and yourself. So we didn't want the player going in with a predefined character. We wanted them to be able to identify with the player character however they wanted. Meet Everyone is for our characters. So we knew, like I mentioned, social systems and interactions are important for our audience, and also tied with our monetization. So we needed to populate the world with characters who you actually want to meet and spend time with. And one of the key phrases here was, everyone should be able to relate to someone. And then finally, See Everything, which is our quests and our story progression. So we knew that we were going to have a really broad range of characters and locations. Genre-wise, we really had a focus on just introducing all sorts of adventures, both big and small. And we wanted each of these to have a moral, kind of like Aesop's fable, you know, like everything should kind of impart knowledge to the player. They should always be able to take something away. So this basically means our premise, our player, our characters, and our quests need to clearly fulfill each of their pillars before we can greenlight them. And this can really help figure out paths to follow and where to dig and things to avoid. And if anything doesn't adhere to one of your pillars, it probably needs to be reworked. Otherwise, it might not synergize with the rest of your game. So you can use these pillars as a benchmark to basically gatekeep and ensure the quality of your writing. It will just help you give a direction to work towards. And that's really important in creating stable and meaningful game worlds. And it also helps with project scope. That just occurred to me. I probably should have thought of that before. This next part is 3 different sections that you can kind of do in tandem. And that's figuring out who the player is, what the lore of your world is, and who some of your core characters are. So the player character, these are the shoes that your player is going to be literally stepping into, or figuratively. That was a bad writer of me. No one wants to play as someone boring. So this doesn't have to be all the details of your player character. A lot of that you'll figure out as you go. But at the very least, you can figure out what kind of player character you're going to include. And through my research, I kind of found 2 main archetypes of protagonist. There's obviously some nuance and variations, especially in game design. But broadly, is your protagonist a blank slate or a crafted hero? So the blank slate really just has little to no defined personality beyond anything emergent that the player may place upon them themselves. It allows the player to slide really easily into the role, and I just identify however they wish. It's also great in terms of flexibility within the narrative, because these protagonists are usually not a pivotal part of the story, as weird as that is to think about. They're usually not necessarily reacting to things, and they're just kind of letting it all happen to them. I look at them more like observers, people that events are happening to, but they are not like a driving force, like the player character in Animal Crossing or BioShock or pretty much any D&D experience. Then we have the crafted hero, and this is the polar opposite. So this is a character with a very predefined personality. You are literally stepping into the shoes of someone else. I said literally again. That was bad of me. These characters are the center of your narrative. They're going to be the driving force of the action. They're much more grounded in the world and amongst the other characters. So Geralt from The Witcher, Lara Croft, Spider-Man, Nathan Drake, all these very famous and nameable characters. These are people you're stepping into the shoes of. They're crafted for you to experience their world and their life, rather than putting your own identity on them. I'm losing my voice already. This is not good. So next up is our lore. Actually, sorry, got another note on that. So both of these allow for character customization. So in my opinion, Doom Guy from, guessed it, Doom, he's a blank slate. You can't customize him, but You have Stardew Valley, where you can customize them, but they are still a blank slate. Geralt, his story and visuals are very much set in stone, other than the occasional haircut, if you wish. But Commander Shepard from Mass Effect 3 is fully customizable, right down to their gender and backstory options, but you're still stepping into the shoes of a predefined character. There's just some variations you can take along the way. Figuring this out now and the core fantasy that your player is stepping into is going to inform literally everything else. That core fantasy is just what makes the role exciting. So whether you're a farmer starting from scratch on an abandoned farm, or a super soldier wearing a technologically advanced exoskeleton, say that 5 times fast, gunning down baddies, saving the world. Now you're onto our lore. This one is beefy, so good luck. You're probably going to be bursting with ideas at this point in the process, and it's just time to start writing and maybe crying at the same time. So one of the things that I always say is worlds are not created in a vacuum. They have a start, they have a middle, they have an end, just like with any human or any experience, they don't just appear out of nothing. So that lore of your narrative is all the things that happened leading up to the starting point of your game. A lot of this will probably not directly even appear in the game or be acknowledged in the game, but it's still going to inform everything to come, as well as help you keep your narrative on track. Bless you, sir. This is all about just putting a narrative Bible together, which is something that I'm sure you're all familiar with. A growing document that just contains all the important info of your narrative. And it's also just a great place to house everything else, like the razor or your pillars. This is going to help you just start linking some of those ideas together, filling in gaps, and just spotting any plot holes. You don't necessarily have to fill in the plot holes yet, but just to know that they exist and that you need to start thinking about them. I found it really helpful, including a visual timeline of all the key events in the lore. For Moonfrost, that looked like this. Don't worry about the content, I couldn't get a better image. But just very high level, you don't need to go into loads and loads of detail here, but it's just a really helpful way, like just something that you can chop and change and visually move things around so that you can keep your finger on the pulse of the key events and timeline of your lore. So it can be really hard to break down all that lore succinctly and clearly into all of your different topics. Many of those topics are going to be interrelating. They're going to link to each other or kind of mess around with each other, and it can be really hard keeping all of that on track. So one of the things that I like to do is just starting each section with a question. So it's not really a title, it's more a question you're asking yourself, or you might even have your colleagues or friends ask you questions that you want to include. So the obvious, the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, my favorite bonus, the how. So again, don't worry too much about the content, but this is a screenshot from a section of the lore on the narrative Bible, and you can see literally pretty much everything here starts with one of those questions, and that can be really helpful just to keep things on track. So, ensuring every key point in your lore aligns with your restrictions and pillars. This is the point now when you've got everything written down that you should go back to those pillars and that razor that you put together. And just, like I say, just measure it alongside and check it all fits. And if it doesn't, now is the time to start rethinking it, rather than waiting for a year in development and you just can't quite get it to work. One of the best soft skills that you'll learn as a designer is horrible name, but it's killing your babies. And that always makes me think of The Witcher 3. This is all about sacrificing for the betterment of your game. And sometimes you can really love an idea, but if you just can't get it to work, trust me, don't ruin your life trying to get it to work. Sometimes you just need to let it go. And you can use your pillars as that measuring stick to really decide, is this fulfilling what I aimed to do a year ago? Or is this really just taking me off a track that I don't really want to go down? The lore is obviously going to change as you develop, but you still need that cohesive document for your colleagues and for yourself when you obviously forget all those great ideas you had. I think Elden Ring obviously is an amazing example of the power of lore and having it really thought through before you ever start really putting pen to paper of the actual game. So George R.R. Martin was actually, turns out, only really involved in writing the lore and not the actual story of Elden Ring. So concepts like Elden Ring itself or the Tree were formed way later. and they didn't exist before the actual story started being written. So Miyazaki, in an interview, explained how that lore that Martin put together influenced the earlier stages of development, way before anything else was really happening. And it just gave them a bunch of history to build on. So I think that sums up the power of lore. That sounds like a good band name. Next up, we have our characters. This is not going to be your full cast of characters necessarily. It's just kind of your core roster, anyone that you know you'll have. So just figuring out, a handful of those core NPCs and what kind of people live in your world. How do they relate to your world? Do they like it? Maybe not. So through writing down that lore, you've probably identified some characters that you know are going to be present in the game. But beyond that, think about what you know your game will also need. So is there a shopkeeper or a companion or a sidekick? A weird guy who lives in a bush? That's not an example, that was actually a character. Who's the first character your player is going to meet? And just start putting pen to paper and figuring out what they look like. Your NPCs are going to be the most important harbingers when it comes to telling your narrative. You have way more control over what your AI characters do than what your chaotic player does. So really use that to your advantage. You can view your NPCs as tools to tell your story. So coming up with that roster of varied and detailed characters will really give you the tool to tell the story and focus on different issues or challenges, depending on where the narrative takes you, or where you want to take the narrative, depending how you look at it. It's all about using your characters to shine a spotlight on whichever part the narrative needs it, when it needs it. So your characters are going to be reflections of all the aspects of your world. They're going to help you tell your story, progress your action, reveal your lore. One of the things, this is not my own work, but one of the things I came across in my research was the ARC test, which are 3 questions you can ask yourself, and your NPC should really be fulfilling each of them. Does your NPC answer questions that the player may have about the world and story? Do they reinforce the story you're telling? And do they create opportunities for future story twists and arcs? If your NPCs do all 3 of those things, well done, you're onto a winner. Many of mine did not, and I had to sacrifice my babies. So I mentioned before creating some pillars that are specific to your character design, separate from your narrative. So at this point, I realized that was a thing I should probably do. I went back to step 3 and I put some pillars together specifically for our characters. I'm not going to go through all of these. I don't want to bore you, but as an example, personality and purpose was one of the most important ones. It was a theme that kept coming up in every article, every blog post, every interview that I read. Is every designer said personality plus purpose. You can't have one. You have to have both. So characters with a great personality but no gameplay purpose should really just be saved for later, when you can really find a use for them. And classic Zelda game, Templars of Hyrule, is an example of this, where they designed this jaded, badass Kokiri girl who lived in the Lost Woods. She sounded really cool. She was unique. She was new in their creative space. They didn't have anyone like her. But there was no quests, there was no gameplay, there was not even really any dialogue associated with her. She didn't provide anything to the experience. So even though they actually had her character model and she existed in the game, they ended up cutting her, which is brutal. And I would have quite liked to meet her, but never mind. So for every NPC, I put together basically a mini spec that included a list of the same things. First up, we have a tagline. So this is kind of the character's title. This should convey who they are with as few words as possible. So for example, the timid empath or the ray of sunshine. It's kind of like if you had to describe them as an anime stereotype, what would their title be? It should give an instant sense of their personality and also can help you avoid overlap, because if you find that you're wanting to call everyone an empath, you've got too many empaths, take it back. It's not what they do, like their job, it's who they are at their core. Then we have a lesson or a moral. This is the crux of the character's story arc and their development. What do we want the player to learn by engaging with this NPC? Like a character could focus on believing in yourself, or struggling to face old demons, or fix their past mistakes. So imagine every character's equivalent of their Aesop's fable. What are you learning from this experience? We then obviously have an overview of all their basic details, their name, the gender, the age, star sign and birthday if you really want to go overboard, nationality, sexual preferences, in-game locations, just all that key info. I put a table together and just copied and pasted it for each character. Their personality, of course, and one thing that I really like to do is also include a quote, which from that character, just a sentence or two of dialogue that kind of just succinctly sums up their personality and how they speak. So obviously, this is their key traits and their behaviors, the things that make them distinctly them. Something that I really like to do is using the wheel of emotion is create a heat map. So I put like a little pin, a little face for each character on which emotions that character is the most inclined to feel. And that can really help, again, make sure your characters aren't using up too much of the same creative space. And it can help you identify any characters that might not be addressing emotions that you need to address. So if you find everyone is feeling terror and fear, I mean, maybe you've got a horror game and you're doing the right thing, but otherwise you maybe want to have some things on the other side of the spectrum. Their background next. So this is the lore for this specific character. How did they get where they are at the start of the game? And what is their present situation? So just anything that's not their personality, like anything that was just that character's experience before the start of the game. Then some storylines. So this is any storyline that you foresee the character being able to enable. Are they trying to save a failing business? Are they meeting with an estranged parent? Are they running from the law? So what sort of things can the player help them with? And what sort of events can the character trigger? Will they give you the ability to have a really cool car chase scene or something a bit more emotional? Then the player relationship. So this is what role the character should take up in the protagonist world. You should really be focusing on how you want the player to feel towards each character and how they should feel about them. So is it a little sister or a best friend or an arch nemesis, and how and why do they take up that role? Some art references. What me and my colleagues love to do is basically ask in a film who would play them. This isn't an indicator of what the character should actually look like, but just to kind of help highlight their tone and their personality. You don't want to be boring like me and just have text on a slide. You want some images, otherwise people get bored. Music. This might be a bit overkill for some, but I would put together playlists for each character and what they listen to. My colleagues would even sometimes send me songs and say, hey, I think Ash would listen to this. So it was quite a nice way to get everyone involved. I also really enjoyed writing dialogue with their music. It really helped me kind of get into the right tone for each character. And then finally, their mannerisms. And this is something that you're going to be adding to over time. But it's basically any special details that are totally unique to that character. Small details from dialogue, like colloquialisms they might use. Do they say you all or do they say y'all? I nearly tried an American accent there, I'm sorry. Their favorite vegetable, just anything that kind of naturally comes out that you just might want to remember, or for other writers working on the project that they might not remember. And it's just having that list of things to make sure you always keep that tone of voice consistent. By the end of the process, alongside some very talented people, I draw stickmen, not this. You can even create character cards, which can be a really great way of making like the info snack sized. It doesn't include everything for each character, obviously, but it's a really nice way of just kind of getting the fundamentals across, both on your socials or to your colleagues, or just for yourself to be like, oh yeah, I did something good today. Next up, we have our story. So this is really, I just wanted to clarify what I see as the difference between the narrative and the story. For me, the narrative is the overall thing. It's everything added together to create that experience, whereas for me, the story is like the actual sequence of events. So with our lore and all of the history in our past, it's now time to start thinking about the future and the premise of your game. This is kind of the planning stage. It's the things that you're actually going to need in order to create and tell your story. So with all of that lore written down, hopefully you're going to have a solid and broad understanding of the events before your game started, which, like I say, is going to inform everything that's to come. Some of that lore may not get used later or at all, but it's still important. So this step is the premise and beyond. How does the player end up where they are and why? So similar to player archetypes, I did some research. I looked for some broad categories because I'm sad. to help hone in on a premise that I can then use our goals and restrictions to compare it to. So I found 4 broad categories for this. First off is the amnesiac. This one's pretty simple, and if you really take it to the extreme, it can avoid having any starting premise whatsoever. At the very least, it just keeps it very light and doesn't really have to provide any distinct context for who or where the player is. This doesn't mean that the player character literally has amnesia, though some do. Link should probably go see a doctor. But it does indicate who they are or who they were before the game. Sorry, it doesn't indicate who they were before the game, and it doesn't matter for at least right now. Sometimes you can get some additional context for things like character creation, like in Assassin's Creed New Leaf, where you've got a character on a train just asking you some information about yourself. The only thing is it can be tricky sometimes because players may struggle to relate to the protagonist, but it does pair very nicely with the blank slate character archetype. Next up is the fresh start, and speaking of relatable, maybe you guys feel the same. Sometimes I just want to burn everything down, go somewhere and just start fresh. And this is what this premise is all about. It's just really grounded in believable and realistic tropes, and it's something that the players should be able to easily recognize and believe in themselves. So, like getting out of the city and into and away from the daily grind, like in Stardew or Coral Island. Sometimes it can seem less like an adventure and more like a change in lifestyle, like in Animal Crossing New Horizons, you're literally going on holiday. So it kind of depends on the tone that you're trying to create, but especially for life sims, this one can work really well. The next up is the rabbit hole, which is a personal favorite of mine. It's an obvious reference to Alice in Wonderland, falling down a figurative rabbit hole. This is the moment that whisks the protagonist away on an unanticipated adventure, notably without their consent. Consent is important, so don't take that the wrong way. The protagonist is usually doing something potentially out of their regular routine, and they accidentally end up somewhere that they didn't really intend to be, like in Spirited Away. You're driving in the car breaks down, you look down a tunnel, walk a little bit, now your parents are pigs. Casual Tuesday afternoon, apparently. It's somewhat magical while still being grounded in reality, like chasing a rabbit before falling down a hole. And the protagonist knows what they're doing, but not the outcome of their actions, like chasing a rabbit before falling down a hole. It's great for adding some magic or whimsy without having to go too extreme or too overboard. And it just gets the protagonist where they're needed without having to answer lots of questions or give too much detail. And then finally, we have the Hogwarts letter. And this is an adventure triggered by a clear call to action. The protagonist may not have expected the call happening, but when it's received, they make a conscious decision to answer it. This is something that is impossible in reality. And similar to the rabbit hole, the protagonist may not know the outcome or what the adventure will be, but the key difference is that they are aware it's an adventure nonetheless. So like in Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Wendy and Peter Pan, it's a conscientious choice to leave your normal life behind in order to find out what happens. If Hogwarts letters do really exist, I'm really annoyed that I never got one. And it taps into that childhood wonder and dream of wanting to receive something like a Hogwarts letter. So this can be a great way to immediately introduce some mystery to solve, to weave into your larger narrative. And it can also give the player some solid understanding of where they are and how they got there. But it also means you need to figure all of that out now. So more work for you. So next up, you can just start visually mapping out some of the timeline of events again, similar to what we did for the lore, but you're probably going to want to go a bit more in depth here. So what are the key beats? How do you bridge gaps in your story? What is the player doing in their downtime? Apologies for the rubbish image. I couldn't find a better one, but something that game company did for Journey, which I really resonated with, is basically creating a spreadsheet that includes anything and everything related to their narrative journey. So that can be story events, intensity level, location, any mechanics or characters you might unlock, focal points for the lore, anything like that. And Mass Effect 3 did also something similar, which I really liked. So they broke each of their sequences down by location, thematic focus, and emotion. And this can also be really helpful for your level and your environment design. These are all the emotions that you're targeting, and you can achieve that in every aspect of the experience, not just the literal words on the screen. So for example, after the crash in Mass Effect 3, that really wanted to enshroud the player in chaos and carnage. So rather than just like hearing a character cry and, exposition it all out, there's debris everywhere, there's flames, there's literal chaos, and that really creates that sense of urgency. Journey obviously does a very similar thing, and I know Tomb Raider uses this as well. If you want the player to feel claustrophobic or lonely, put them in a section with a dark and tight cave, and then when you want them to start feeling hope, you literally see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that instantly changes the mood and the tone of the sequence. Next up is the actual development, implementation, and production of your narrative. So this is going to include some examples of how I expanded the story and made some design decisions for features, but a lot of this is going to be on you. Maybe come back for my next talk and I'll figure the next bit out. So this is all the extra details that make your world and your lore distinct, and smaller details that are harder to see when you're looking at that big picture and all of that high level stuff. So now it's kind of time to start like going down specific rabbit holes, working with your colleagues, music or art, or just people who are interested to create that clearer sense of the world. So for me, as a primarily prose fiction writer, and as my background, I wrote a bunch of short stories that were kind of set at different points in my lore's timeline. So for example, I picked a child growing up in a pivotal moment, and then just detailed out some of their experiences growing up. And then my colleague helped me bring that to life by creating snapshots of some of those key moments. These small details just organically brought themselves into the world, like naming conventions or the social structure at that time. And hopefully those extra details can help tie together any missing links that you still have. Something else you can do is also just write some diary entries from the perspective of your made-up protagonist. This can discuss events or interactions or introductions to other characters that they might meet. And just all of these things are just going to organically bring out those smaller details and ideas that you're not going to be able to see at the high level. And as one of my favorite authors, Ursula K. Le Guin, would say, who wrote Earthsea, just let the story take you where it wants to go. You don't have to be in complete control all the time. You can just sometimes see what happens. Alongside this, just focusing on the actual implementation and the systems and features and mechanics that you're going to need to tell your story. Consider how you're communicating your narrative inside the game. How does the dialogue system work, and why does it work that way? How is the environment going to reflect your narrative? And you can just start listing out all the systems that you'll need, and some of the systems that you would like, but you're probably not going to get, let's be honest. Using all those materials, the most important thing is that you're making rationale-based decisions, and that is a whole different talk on its own, but really thinking not just, I think it should work like this because, but why, and actually listing those out so that you're really consciously thinking about it. So for, I've lost my place now. So for our dialogue system, I looked at a bunch of references to figure out what would and wouldn't work based on what I knew about the game or what already existed inside the game, which is really the key way to designing a synergetic feature and system, something that works with everything else that already exists. So as a pixel art isometric game, our in-game characters are very cute, also very small. So with our characters, we knew that they were a vital part of our monetization, and we really needed them to come alive on screen as per our pillar, as well as be really easy to relate to and create those emotional bonds with. So what we decided to have instead is fully illustrated characters and portraits of characters that could really express themselves and change facial expression. We knew that one of our overall game pillars was a living, breathing world that reacts and responds to the player. This was more related to players interacting with the world and systemic interactions, like tall grass bristling in the wind, or scaring a bird away, or a deer running from a wolf. But I really wanted to incorporate this into the narrative too, so that philosophy was permeating as much of the experience as possible. So I found that Hades was the best reference, as it is for a lot of things. So I did loads of research and played so many hours. My life is so hard. And I deconstructed it and created a system very much inspired by them, but obviously with some key differences and nowhere near as powerful. So that system is really relying on varying priority levels for the conversation, conditions so that the conversation only triggers when it needs to, like based on the current weather, or if you have a certain item in your inventory. We ended up with a system that seemed really simple on the surface, with a clean UI, satisfying sound effects and characters that could reflect the emotion, and just a bit of text. But under the surface, it was really intricate. It was this ecosystem that could respond to the player as they explored and engaged with the gameplay in the story world. So when we settled on this system, we realized it really did fit all the criteria we'd set ourselves, and we found that it really uplifted our narrative. So those are all the steps that I did. Maybe you'll do some of them, maybe you won't. So just starting off, and this is now when I quiz myself to see if I can remember anything I just said. So starting off, looking at your restrictions and your goals, set yourself some goals based on what you know about the game and what you're trying to achieve. Put together a razor of your key inspirations, 2 to 4. Put some philosophies and beliefs together and create some pillars to uphold your narrative. Then you can start looking at your player character. Are they a blank slate or a crafted hero? Put some beautiful lore together, put some characters together, put some story together. I'm just boring you now. And then develop the bloody thing. And this final one is just because I thought it was satisfying having everything in green. So that is me. Thank you guys so much for listening to me talk. I'm still Indigo. If you really forgot, that's my name 3 times. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I really don't say much, but I'm always happy to have a chat. Send me your cat videos at the very least. I love them. I hope this was somewhat helpful, maybe somewhat entertaining. Feel free to come and say hi. And thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks. I don't know what I'm doing now. I'm going to stand it.